TTArtisan 75 1.5. It is probably one of the most unique and interesting looking lenses that's come out recently because it's got that Swirly Bokeh in the background. Now, the hard part is if you're somebody like me, it's a manual focus lens. And when I'm doing videos like this, I do not stand still. I move a lot. I work with my hands a lot. And sometimes I can't see that far to see if I'm actually in focus or not, even though I've got focus peaking on and all that kind of stuff. It's just, sometimes it's just difficult, okay? Bear with me though. This is one of those lenses that is very cool, and because of the price point of $269, it's one of those, if you want to learn manual focus lens, if you want to give your videos or your photos just that unique look with that swirly background, it's a great way to do it. This lens is basically a newer and cheaper version of the Biopter 75mm that came out years and years ago that a lot of people used in the past. Or you can look at it as a more swirly version of the Helios. Now, what are some things you need to know about this lens? It's a manual focus, it's 75mm, and above all else, it's an M42 adapter. So what does that mean for you? It means if you buy this lens, you're gonna have to make sure you get an M42 to whatever your mount is adapter. So an M42 to an E mount, an M42 to a RF mount, or an M42 to a Z mount. Whatever you use, you're gonna have to look for an adapter and pay that extra money. It goes down to a 1.5 and it goes up to a f16. And it's got 13 aperture blades, which is gonna allow you to have that really smooth bokeh in the background. The minimum focus distance is 0.75, and it's a 58mm right there for the filter thread. So as we start to focus in, you're gonna start to see that swirl in this side and on this side, in those greeneries, in that green area, you're just gonna start to see it. But one thing to note is, watch what happens when we go past it being in focus and you start to see the background a little bit. Now you're starting to see a lot more of that swirl. So you may have to change where your subject is in order to get more of that swirl in the background. Obviously, like I said, this is a 1.5, so if we change it to like a 2.8 or anything like that, more of the image is gonna be in focus, but then you're definitely gonna lose some of that swirl, because as we go back, you don't really see too much of it. But if we go forward again, and we start to get more of that background in focus, you're gonna lose that swirl, and obviously your subject's not gonna be in focus, but you start to lose it. So just keep that in mind, that you may have to change where your subject is in order to get that swirl and see more of it, because you probably are gonna have it all the way out at something like a 1.5 in order to see it, but you're just gonna have to change exactly where your subject is in accordance to what your minimum focal distance is, because right here, you're seeing that swirl very, very well that this is known for. But what we'd have to do is take this lens and move it all the way back here, even farther than I can reach over the fence. But now that I'm across the fence on the other side, just another foot or so away from where I had that lens at, now you can see more of that swirl. So you may just have to change where your subject is in accordance with where your lens is. You may have to play with the focus a little bit. You may have to have them step back, step forward. Another thing is I'm shooting at a 1.5, so you have that very thin depth of field. So it's gonna be harder to get the subject in focus. So you may just need to change it to, you know, a 2.8 or something like that. You're still gonna get a little bit of that swirl, but at a 1.5, it's gonna be a lot more drastic. So let's dive into this more into detail and check out about how you can get more of that swirl in the background, but also some of the issues you might have when you're taking images, like chromatic aberration that you get in a lot of these vintage style lenses. I know I said we're gonna dive into the photos, but I really wanted to mention one little thing quick that does annoy me about this lens. Now, like I said, it's a beautiful lens. Both the lens caps are made of metal, and that's why this thing's a little heavy at that 582 grams. But the thing I wanted to mention is actually this area right here. You see all the numbers on this lens, right? For your focus distance and for what your aperture is gonna be, is that when I put it on my camera right here, and I twist this on, how you would, right? Just slide it right on like that. Look at where these numbers are on this camera. You see that? They're at the bottom right here. So in order for you to see what aperture it's at the bottom. Same with the focus distance, right? It's both right there at the bottom, instead of being at the top where you could see it if it was up here, right? If I'm shooting, you want the aperture ring to be up here, not down here, because like, who's gonna see that? So keep that in mind. Now, that could be something to do with the mount I'm using. I've tried it on different ways. I've tried a billion different things, and it always goes back to the bottom. So I'm just throwing that out there. All right, so let's dive into these photos quick. So right here, we have a f1.5, and we can see that swirl around the edges, right? And it just brings focus to whatever is gonna be your subject. It's just gonna bring a nice focus to it because of that swirl. Now, when we zoom in, you can definitely see that chromatic aberration right there. And you have some right here along these edges. You can see that green, and you can see the greens more out here, and then it kind of fades almost to that magenta color. But it's not too terrible. But when we go to the f2.8, what we're going to see is the same exact thing, right? You're going to have it right there, and you're going to have that chromatic aberration down to all these areas. And you can see where this area is really good in focus. There's a little less of it on those edges as compared to this area where it wasn't more focused in on. But when we go to the f4 right here, you can see less swirl, more that background's going to be in focus, which is what happens when you up your f-stops. And then when we zoom in, you can see there's less chromatic aberration. And now this one's at f4. And you can see, right, there's not a lot of chromatic aberration there. When we go to these edges here, you don't really see it as much, right? But when we go down here, you can see it a little bit on this 1.4 on these edges, but you got to really be looking for it. When we go to the side right here, you rarely notice it. And we go even higher to the next one, F8, you still see that swirl, but it's definitely not as dramatic as when we jump back to that 1.5 where you have that because you have that really nice blurry background. But that chromatic aberration is all but gone now, right? I got this one really good in focus. And you can see it's basically gone when you get up to an f1.8, but you're sacrificing that swirl. So you have to keep that in mind. And now we're at an f22. Whole background's there. You don't really see any type of swirl, but you don't also see any chromatic aberration. So let's jump back to the first image really quick because look at that chromatic aberration. Now, if you want to get rid of that, it's honestly not that difficult. Now, the thing is that there are no profile corrections because of it being a manual focus lens, so the camera doesn't have that data on the memory card. Now, if we hit remove chromatic aberration, you get a little bit of it removed. If you look here, you obviously have to look really close, but a little bit of it gets removed, right? You don't see as much of the green. And if you hit enable profile corrections, it's not going to do anything because that lens obviously is not in Lightroom. So what you have to do is hit the manual button, and then you can go over here to defringe. And you can see we're at that 1.4. We see all that purple. Now, if we want to get rid of it, we just slide it over. And then same with this green. There's two different colors you notice a lot when it comes to chromatic aberration, and that's going to be like purples, cyans, and greens. And that's why you have these green hues that go from like green to yellow and to blue, and then you have purple and red and blue because you can kind of adjust it accordingly. Now, if we just adjust this a little bit, you can see where it just kind of disappears. So even if it doesn't remove it all the way with this remove chromatic aberration button, go to the manual area because you're going to have images like this. This is one of my friend Neil with his Blackmagic Pixis, and you can see that it's a nice looking image. The colors are very soft. We shot this actually at midday, about 1 p.m. And as soon as you go in, you see all that chromatic aberration around this whole thing, even around his finger. And if you look out here, just looking at more of a distance than zooming in, you can see towards this cable right here and down in this area, there is a lot of green that it might throw somebody off and think, why does he have something like a green cable, even though the whole rig is black? That's because of the chromatic aberration. Now, all we would have to do is just go to the amount we want to get rid of, and it starts to go away. Now, not all of it's going to go away because of how much is in here. So you can play with your sliders if you need to and try to get rid of some of it. And you can see now there's not nearly as much. You don't even really notice it now that we changed those adjustments. So that's just a quick way to do it. But you can see it kind of brings focus to this whole area right here. You're starting to look at this lens. You're starting to look at what does he have? Like, what is this? What is the camera he's using? All that kind of stuff. So it's a very cool way to bring focus to somebody is with that Swirly Bokeh. But like I stated, you're going to have it at a 1.5 or a 2.8 because once you start getting above that to like an f8, it just disappears. You still have it a tiny bit at that f4, but like we talked about, it needs to be at a certain focal distance and have a good aperture as well. And with a lower aperture, it's very hard to gain focus, especially on yourself, like I was doing in that video, because you have this razor thin margin of being able to get an area in focus because it's a 1.4. Now, if you're shooting yourself and you're at like an f8, it's gonna be a lot easier because more of that image is in focus. Lastly, we have this little truck my son plays with. And just look at this. Like, look at that background, how it like swirls here, and you kind of have this area in focus. Now, obviously there was something in front of the lens on this side, but it kind of brings this, oh, I know what the subject is, just like it did with this tripod right here. It's like, oh, I know what this subject is because look at that swirl right there. Look at these tree branches kind of going around it and how this tree kind of swirls a little bit and brings this straight to the subject. So we have this image of my wife, and you can kind of see just how that background is swirled around her, and it just brings focus to her face, right? So yes, you're gonna have that chromatic aberration no matter where. We'll look at her sunglasses and you can definitely see it around here, but also it's a vintage lens. Now don't forget, this is based off the Biopter 75mm that came out in the 1930s and then was discontinued because of World War II, and people loved it, but there weren't enough people buying it because of the cost of the war that they couldn't afford it. So it's based off of that. So you're gonna have these vintage film characteristics in this lens, and you can still get that Biopter, but it then goes for like $1,500, if not more. And it's gonna be harder to find. So keep that in mind. But the chromatic aberration thing is not really that big of a deal because you can remove it. Now, who's this lens for? Because this lens isn't for everybody. There's a lot of people that just want to use automatic autofocus and don't even want to go near manual focus, because in this video and record a bunch of times and a lot of it was out of focus while I was trying to use this lens because you're not used to manual focus. But if you're looking for that unique flair to one of your videos, you're trying to create something just a little different, and you want those swirls in the background, and you want something that has just a little bit of a vintage look to it, then this is probably the lens for you. Plus, it's not on that insane price point that not a lot of people see, and they're gonna be like, kind of look at your video a little more because it's gonna add this unique characteristic to your videos. Then maybe this is for you. But there's a lot of people that are also gonna look at this lens and be like, that's making me dizzy. I don't even want to go near that lens. But I appreciate you hanging out with me. I hope this was helpful. God bless. I'll see you in the next one.